Okay, Madison, so we're just going to try to look at these in little tiny chunks as we go along. I've just got the first little bit of your scene loaded. It's also, you'll see it's moving a little bit slowly. What I did is slowed things down. I went into the preferences here, and I told it to play back at half speed, just so I could see this. And so the basics of this are pretty close. I mean, it's the basic timing and the speed that it's coming in there and the bounce. But it's just about the little squash and stretch and a little bit of the side-to-side movement. And yours is a little bit different. It's kind of unique how you're treating the angles, I guess. So how it was moving across. And because of the hops that are in there, you have extra keyframes on the Z and the X that are causing it to kind of move from side to side. So we'll look at that. All right, so as I just scrub through here, so you can see with the squash and stretch here, you can see it's already starting to compress before it hits the ground. Here, it's starting to do the right thing. It just needs to be accentuated a little bit. You can see that it's basically extended almost all the way that it's going to extend, and then it comes off the ground. Here you can see it starts to compress just a little bit. But the nice thing is it hits the ground. You can see it actually compresses more, so that's a plus. This one here, you can see it's compressed and it starts to come up in 2 frames, so that's not bad, right? I just think it could be a little bit more. You can also see that it kind of moves a little sideways here. And again, it starts to compress a little bit before it's actually hit the ground. And the other thing too is it kind of slows down, kind of eases in there. So let's go ahead and go to the animation layout, and we'll start with your main controller there. All right, so we have your little hops. So that, again, the first thing here, let's make sure I got the move tool active. And I'm using my Magic Mouse here, which is not my favorite tool. I'm on my home computer, so my apologies, it seems a little jumpy. So one thing you can see here is that based on the distance here, it's hard to get this jump kind of in the middle. I think this would be totally fine, but just so you know, there are these 2 little icons here that look like a magnet and a hairbrush. So these are snapping, so snap to value, so that if we would move this, it would snap to a whole number, and then rarely would you do that. And on this one, we have snap to time. So if I turn that off here for a second, you can see I can adjust that without having it hit the whole frame. Now I do this with a little bit of trepidation, so I get this nice thing. So basically it's going to render at frame 32 pretty close to the peak, and then at frame 33 starting to come down. It's not going to actually render the whole peak based on where that frame is. But based on, stupid multi-gesture stuff here. You can see I get a little more freedom where I might want to put that. Now, you certainly don't want to do that on the frames down here because we want to make sure that it's actually hitting the ground, right? But based on where the peak of the jump is, you can put it at a half frame, and again, it will render the little frames just on either side of that, and you wouldn't even notice. So you don't have to do that. I think it'll be totally fine, but just because of the way things are spaced in here, it might be something to keep an eye on. Okay, so that's the first thing, right? So we fixed that part that where it actually comes down and lands kind of hard. Let's go back to the squash and stretch. And so this is all basically in your scale, right? So it comes off the ground here. So it's going to hit the ground, I guess, at this frame. You can see actually some of these frames, because they've been scaled, they're just slightly off, right? So I can, actually I can just do it all down here if I want to, or if I guess since I've been just doing it on these frames, I can, let's turn the snap back on. And have my move tool. And let's see if it already went and did it. It's just a little nudge. Oh, that one's off as well. Let's turn this back on. There we go. Snap right there. I don't want to move those other ones that I intentionally took off, the scaling. So underneath edit is the snap, right? So I can click those and make sure they're there. So let's look at this one. So it comes in and you can see it starts to compress like when it hits the ground, right? And then it's up above that. So right here, what I'm going to do is just insert keyframes. In fact, maybe what I'll do is just move this one over. So you can see it's kind of extended and then it hits. And it's going to extend when it leaves the ground, right? Stupid multi-touch. Okay, so it's going to jump to, right? So that's going to be up in the air. That's fine. So the one where it's still on the ground here, in fact, maybe let's just go back one more keyframe. If I select the curve itself, and with the time marker exactly at that place, I'm just going to insert a key. Right, and I'm going to move that down. In fact, I'll make both of these. In fact, if I want to do, I'll do this one. I'm going to break it, and I'll put this one flat, and maybe I'll do this one so it's flat as well, right? So these are basically just keeping it at that same amount, right? And then it's jumping up and extending. In fact, I'm going to just take that over one. You know what? I'm going to move both of those over a little bit. There we go. I'm going to keep it totally compressed and see how it comes off the ground. Right, as soon as it comes off the ground, it's up in the air. And then the last little tweak, maybe I'll put one right in here. I could do this with the curves, or I could insert that key. And I'll take this one. So I could almost lock those back together. I guess part of it is I want it to come down and continue to compress a little bit, like it's getting ready. And I want it to be a little deeper, right, at that. You see how there's a little spring to it, right? So let's just go ahead and keep these going. This one I'm just going to unify those tangents, flatten those tangents. There we go. So this one I don't need necessarily to keep a break on it. And if I want to, right before it hits the ground, right? So let's figure that out again. So it hits right there. And let's just make it the frame before it's still extended. And we'll take this one over. Right, so it's going to stay extended, and then it's going to hit the ground. It's going to compress. You've got the right idea here, right? So it starts to spring up. So that's well done. Just going to pull that there, and I'm going to go ahead and put another keyframe right here. I'm going to do it slightly different just to kind of play with the method. So we'll do just one more time here. So this is got the little recoil here, right, where it comes back into that state. So maybe what I'll do is insert a key. I'll make this one go down. And some of these I'm just unbreaking them, right? So I'm just going to make them so that they're unified like they are as a default. And maybe what I'll do is take this one and put it over here. And if I want to at that peak, maybe what I can do, let's insert there, let's put another key. And I'm going to make that value 1, right? So it's kind of holding, so it extends, it kind of gets to its normal shape, and then it stretches out again. You could even say insert another key. I'll make that one flat. So the main thing here is I'm going to stretch it out and let it get back to its normal shape. And then right before it hits the ground, I'm going to stretch it out. Now this works better with the ball controller based on how it's falling. But I'm just trying a few different tweaks to the style of this, but still obeying kind of the basic physics, right? So you can see there's more of a pop. Let's go ahead and play this. So hopefully you can see that where it's really working with the, and you can experiment, like, you know, there's what I did in the little video. Like maybe we like really drag that down. Right, so it comes down and it kind of compresses, but then it compresses just one more frame so that we really get the idea that it's jumping. Let's look at that. All right, again, and this is half speed. Some of this is going to be, you know, it's going to be quick, just based on the timing that you have here. So I think it should still work fine. All right, so let's look at a couple new things that are going on here. So one part is at that final landing, you can see that it kind of stops, excuse me, moving forward, right? So this is the other thing I want to try to fix here. Let's just look at the X-Translate, and I'm going to hold on the command key on the Mac. It's control if you're working on a PC. All right, so the one thing is that the box lands right here, right? But then you have these other keyframes. If I'm to go to the top view, oops, object mode. And sorry, my magic mouse sometimes just doesn't like to work with the middle mouse button. You can see it's kind of moving from side to side. In fact, you can see that last jump right here kind of goes side to side. I guess it could do that, but it seems weird that it's going sideways, I guess, for me, and it's kind of traveling in an arc across there. All right, so let's frame up on these. So what I would recommend actually is, let's go back to the perspective view. So if it starts out here on frame 1 and it's moving forward, and it's going to end up at frame 37 here, right, on that landing spot, I honestly would delete all of those. So it moves basically in a straight line. The other thing you can see is it's trying to smooth in between these. I would actually suggest that you break the two tangents for this, and then I'm going to select these tangents here and make them linear. So it's a straight line. And I'll do the same thing here, just make those a straight line. So now it's just moving over to point A. Right, so it's moving in a straight line, and you don't get the little bit of that waggle. I know that you might be like, well, I don't really see that too much, but you really kind of feel it. It seems like it's just something's wrong with the jump, right? So this is just a little bit cleaner. We see that it's moving straight forward. Since it's facing straight forward, that's kind of the direction it needs to jump, I would say. I guess it could jump sideways, but we'd need some other thing to show, like, okay, well, how is that happening, right? How is it like bending or something to make that happen? This makes sense because it's moving forward, so therefore it can jump forward. It would actually have to stop and do something different to be able to jump sideways. All right, so that's another little tiny fix, right? So I think we're getting somewhere, and there's a little pop and land right there. I think you had most of that already done. That's nice. So the last thing I would suggest is using the bend to really do some fun stuff here. So let's, we haven't even keyframed any of that, right? So let's just try to break this down. So right before, like as it's coming in, let's start with the idea that the character is fact, let's make it more pronounced. I'll do something really, it's not really more pronounced, it's just a little pronounced, right? So I'm going to put a keyframe there, and let's just look at the bend, so I don't have any other animation on it yet. So as it lands, let's do -5 maybe, right? So let's look at this. So the whole idea over 3 frames, right? Can you see how it's like it's leaning backwards, and then it hits and it falls forward in that little section there. And maybe we'll keep it bent forward like this. So I'll put another keyframe there. And then as it gets going, I'll make it even more pronounced. Key select. So we can see now it's like it's using its body to fling itself, right? So we're catching it as it's already kind of coming into the scene with its back arched, right? And then it hits and falls forward. And can you see how it's just kind of arching itself a little bit? And we'll do the same thing here. I'll just put another key in that. And let's do -7 maybe, so we'll make it go forward. And then maybe right before it actually leaves the ground, I'm going to make this even more pronounced. I'm going to lean it forward. And I'll go back to making this 10. So let's just try to look at this. So it falls forward, it arches its back to get itself off the ground. You can see it hits, so it starts to lose its bend and catches itself. Even starts to lean forward a little bit more here so that it seems like it's flinging itself off the ground, right? And the other thing too is even though it's arching itself back and forth, this is staying flat the whole entire time. So the last thing is I'm going to go to this little controller for the rotate. So what if we rotated the body? So when it's on the ground, it needs to be flat, right? So I'm just going to put keys there. And it's on the ground, it needs to be flat, right? We can't rotate it through the floor. Same thing here. So I'm just setting these up as placeholders, right? I just know for sure I need to keep it in those states. Right. So, but what happens when it's in the air, right? So right before it lands, what if I just rotate that? And I guess here too, we want to make sure it's still rotated a similar amount. And we'll rotate that there. So we're just making it look like the bottom end is getting dragged along. And the other thing too is because it's kind of arched back here, I don't want it to, in essence, slowly transition to the state here. It's just like with the compression, right? So here I want it to be leaning back. And you know, some of this is the style of it, right? Like what kind of style? You can see right here, it's like moving through the floor, right? That's where it comes off the ground. So let's get back to this one. Zero that out and put a key there. Right? So, and I did those as kind of, you know, big jumps. Like maybe at the very top I could thin this out. Maybe it's only -5 on the rotation, right? Right, so it eases up. So as it comes through here, right, it kind of flattens out. Right, but just when it always keeps flat the whole entire time, even if it's just a little bit, right? So let's try a different kind of little leap here. So what if it I could even use the tilt if I wanted to on this one. Let's go back to this. Let's back up a frame here. Put a little keyframe there. And I'm going to make this tilt 5. Is that right? Oops. Let's do -5. So as it comes forward, it lands, and maybe what it does here right before it leaves is let's make this 5. So it's kind of scrunching its shoulder one way or the other and kind of lean back in that tilt. Like let's keep that at something like -5. And let's keep that at -3 right there, so it's still tilting. So now if we're using the tilt and it's kind of flinging itself, maybe what we'll do is we'll use this little controller. Go back to this, right? So it's on the ground, and then a couple frames in the air, I'll kind of tilt it, and I'll tilt it back a little bit. And obviously it's holding that tilt, so that's kind of fine. I'll key that so it's still like off center a little bit, and then the next frame it actually hits, right? So then we want that to find its way flat. Maybe as it's up here, maybe we actually make that a little bit smaller. Oops. Just wanted that one, -2, and we'll make that 2. Right, we could try a lot of little things. As it flings itself, maybe it starts to lean a little bit on this side and it kind of lands on the tilt. But just doing little things so that it has a little more personality. So let's try this now. You can just see how it's a little more alive. It's a little springier. It's not flat and just at an angle the whole entire time. Anyways, 22 minutes. I'll go ahead and wrap this one up. I'll save this as an example. There are other things we could do, little examples later on, like the teeter-totter, right? You keyframed this transitioning later on in the animation. Right here, right? So it comes down and it lands on that little teeter. Very easy to just animate it so that it hits the ground. And maybe a couple frames afterwards, it goes up a little bit. And then it goes back down onto the ground like it should. Maybe even does just a little bit. I can just put a couple keyframes in here. All right, so let's look at this rotate Z. All right, so this is that big flat on the ground, right? So it hits it, and then we'll take these, move them over. Just one. Right? So the whole idea that it just kind of bounces on the ground, it doesn't totally just hit and land. There's some little recoil. You can basically see the little intensity, right? You could just... We'll go ahead and play through here. Right? Can you see that little bounce? It just adds a little bit to it. So those are the kind of things that I'm talking about. I definitely would go back and look at this, the jump, based on some of the ideas we had about it, the compression and how that works. And also look at, maybe you can see how it's kind of lifting off. So look at your X and Z. Maybe you have some extra keyframes. Once it's off the ground here, you don't really need any of those X and Z keyframes, right? You just need it to land on top of that. All right, take a look at this. Let me know if it's helpful, and we'll go from there.